Hello. Welcome to this special deep dive episode. I'm your host. Today we're embarking on a journey into one of the most important and often misunderstood aspects of human development: the psychology and neuroscience of what happens when a child grows up in poverty. This isn't just abstract science or dry statistics. This is about real lives. Millions of children whose brains and minds are shaped every single day by environments of scarcity, stress, and uncertainty. We'll explore the powerful ways chronic poverty rewires the developing brain and influences behavior, emotions, and long-term outcomes. But more importantly, we'll confront a hard truth. Ridiculing or stigmatizing people who grew up this way isn't just unkind, it's scientifically misguided and socially destructive. Instead, understanding these mechanisms compels us toward compassion, support, and systemic change that benefits everyone. Be why the end of this episode. And yes, you'll see why empathy isn't optional. It's the evidence-based path forward. We'll draw on decades of rigorous research from neuroscientists like Farah, Gary Evans, Joan Luby, Seth Pollack, and McLaughlin, among many others. Studies published in JAMA Pediatrics, PNAS, Nature Communications, and leading psychology journals. This is human science at its most illuminating. Let's start with a thought experiment. Imagine a young brain as a house under construction. In a stable, resource-rich environment, builders have all the materials, time, and support they need. Strong foundations, ample wiring for electricity and plumbing, spacious rooms for complex functions. But in poverty, the construction site faces constant disruptions, storms of stress, shortages of nutrients and stimulation, interruptions from family instability. The house still gets built, but the wiring might be less efficient, certain rooms smaller, the foundation a bit more vulnerable to future earthquakes. That's not a metaphor for weakness. It's adaptation to a harsh reality. And it explains so much about the observable differences we see. Poverty isn't just less money. For children, it's a constellation of adversities: food insecurity, unstable housing, exposure to violence or noise, parental stress that ripples down, limited access to enriching experiences like books, quality childcare, or even quiet time to play. According to the American Psychological Association and extensive longitudinal data, kids in poverty face higher rates of these adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, which compound over time. Now let's dive into the neuroscience. The brain develops most rapidly in the first few years, a period of explosive growth where over 1 million neural connections form every second. Chronic stress from poverty hijacks this process through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis, our body's stress response system. When a child experiences repeated threats, hunger pangs, eviction fears, loud arguments, the HPA axis floods the system with cortisol, the stress hormone. In small, acute doses, cortisol is helpful. It sharpens focus for a real emergency. But in poverty, it's toxic stress, prolonged, unrelenting activation without the buffering of safe, responsive caregiving. High cortisol literally prunes away connections in key brain regions. Studies consistently show smaller hippocampal volumes in children from low-income families. The hippocampus, that seahorse-shaped structure deep in the temporal lobe, is crucial for memory formation, learning, and spatial navigation. One landmark 2013 study by Joan Luby and colleagues at Washington University, published in JAMA Pediatrics, followed children and found that those exposed to poverty in early childhood had significantly smaller white matter, cortical gray matter, and hippocampal and amygdala volumes by school age. The amygdala, our emotional alarm system, can become hyperreactive or dysregulated, leading to heightened anxiety or emotional numbing. Prefrontal cortex development takes another hit. This CEO of the brain, located right behind your forehead, governs executive functions: planning, impulse control, working memory, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Research from Farah's lab at the University of Pennsylvania, and others like Kimberly Noble, shows that lower socioeconomic status (SES) correlates with reduced prefrontal volume and thinner cortex in these areas. In one analysis of over 400 children, the poorest kids showed the greatest lags in gray matter development in frontal and temporal lobes, areas tied to language and complex thought, explaining up to 20% of academic achievement gaps. White matter integrity suffers too. A Washington University study found less organized white matter tracts in children from poor households, Those highways connecting brain regions don't transmit signals as efficiently. Diffusion tensor imaging reveals reduced directional movement of water molecules along these fibers, linked to visuospatial challenges and mental health issues. These aren't deficits in the moral sense. They're biological embeddings of environment. Animal studies confirm it. Rats in impoverished cages show similar hippocampal shrinkage and HPA dysregulation. Human MRI data from thousands of kids in the ABCD study, adolescent brain cognitive development, replicate this. Lower family income predicts smaller hippocampi, with neighborhood poverty adding extra layers. Psychologically, this manifests in predictable ways. Children growing up in poverty often show differences in executive function from as early as infancy. They may struggle more with tasks requiring sustained attention or inhibiting impulses, not because of laziness, but because their brains have been tuned for survival in unpredictable settings. Hypervigilance to threats, a smart adaptation in chaotic environments, can make classroom focus harder. Language development lags due to less rich verbal input. Parents under stress talk less or use fewer complex sentences. Gary Evans' pioneering work at Cornell tracked children from age 9 into their 20s. Greater duration of childhood poverty predicted slower decline in internalizing symptoms, anxiety, depression, and faster rise in externalizing ones, aggression, impulsivity. It also fostered learned helplessness, that profound sense that efforts don't matter, because in resource-scarce worlds, many outcomes feel uncontrollable. Chronic physiological stress markers, like elevated allostatic load, wear and tear on the body, climb steeper for those with more poverty exposure. Mental health outcomes are stark. Kids in poverty are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop anxiety, depression, or behavioral disorders. The Surgeon General's reports and meta-analyses link this to both structural brain changes and the daily grind of scarcity. As adults, those who grew up poor report higher psychological distress, poorer physical health, cardiovascular issues, obesity, diabetes, and lower earnings, a cycle perpetuated not by character flaws, but by these early neural scaffolds. But here's the crucial pivot. These changes are not inevitable or irreversible. The brain remains plastic, especially early on. Resilience exists, and science shows pathways to it. Some children in poverty thrive cognitively or emotionally thanks to protective factors. Warm, responsive parenting that buffers cortisol, community support, or innate traits like strong self-regulation. Studies by Jean Brody and others on rural African American youth highlight skin-deep resilience. Kids who appear psychologically resilient may still carry high allostatic load, paying a hidden physiological price. Interventions proved the point. The baby's first year's randomized controlled trial, a groundbreaking study, gave low-income mothers either $333 or $20 monthly unconditional cash transfers starting at birth. After 1 year, infants in the higher cash group showed significantly more high-frequency brain activity, EEG patterns linked to better cognitive development, in regions supporting learning and thinking. This was causal evidence. Poverty reduction literally altered brain function. Published in PNAS in 2022, it stunned the field. Other work from Harvard's McLaughlin shows generous social safety nets, earned income tax credit, Medicaid expansion to NF, cut hippocampal volume disparities by 1/3 and mental health gaps by half, especially in high-cost states. Early childhood programs like high-quality, preschool or parenting interventions, e.g., strengthening attachment, normalize trajectories. Neuroimaging pre- and post-intervention demonstrates increased prefrontal efficiency and better HPA regulation. So why, then, do we so often ridicule instead of support? Stigma is the glue holding poverty in place. Psychological research shows that blaming individuals, lazy, undeserving, stems from just world beliefs and system justification, the comforting myth that the world is fair and outcomes reflect merit. But neuroscience dismantles this. Neurons don't choose smaller hippocampi. Environments sculpt them. Martha Farah has emphasized. Poverty's effects challenge the notion of personal blame. Blaming the wired brain is like faulting a drought-stunted tree for not bearing fruit. Stigma itself harms. It increases shame, which elevates cortisol further, deterring help-seeking. Welfare stigma correlates with worse health outcomes independent of income. People avoid benefits they qualify for, perpetuating cycles. Internalized stigma erodes self-efficacy, worsening learned helplessness. As Rebecca de Souza and others document, neoliberal narratives frame poverty as moral failure, ignoring structural realities like job markets, discrimination, housing costs, and policy choices. Ridiculing ignores the data. Poverty costs society trillions in lost productivity, higher healthcare, crime, and welfare. Supporting breaks this. Cash transfers boost employment and child outcomes. Early interventions yield $7 to $13 return per dollar in reduced special education, crime, and health costs. Lifting families via I2C or CTC has lifted millions of children out of poverty, with long-term gains in adult earnings and health. From a broader view, every human deserves dignity. Empirical humanism demands we address root causes, not symptoms. Think of it personally. If your brain had been shaped by scarcity, constant worry etching pathways of vigilance, would mockery help you plan better or feel motivated? Or would stable support, reliable food, housing, education, allow those adaptive circuits to rewire toward thriving? Resilience research underscores this. Factors like supportive relationships, cognitive stimulation, and reduced toxic stress predict better outcomes even in adversity. Programs fostering parental warmth buffer HPA activity. Community investments in safe neighborhoods and schools pay dividends. We shouldn't ridicule because these individuals didn't design the environment that wired their brains. Poverty is often intergenerational, transmitted through stress and opportunity gaps. Not genetics alone, epigenetics plays a role, but environment dominates. Supporting isn't handouts, it's investment in human potential. Societies with stronger safety nets show smaller brain and mental health disparities. Cash aid changes infant EEG in months. Early education normalizes executive function. Imagine a world where we viewed poverty's psychological scars like we view post-traumatic growth opportunities, with curiosity and aid, not judgment. Where policies prioritize dignity, universal basic supports, quality childcare, mental health access. Data from babies' first years and safety net studies prove it works. As we close this deep dive, and thank you for staying with me through the science, remember, understanding the neuroscience and psychology of poverty doesn't excuse hardship, it explains it. It frees us from myths of deservedness and invites action rooted in evidence and empathy. Ridicule reinforces the very wiring we decry. Support rewires futures for individuals, families, and society. What can you do? Advocate for policies proven to help. Expanded child tax credits, unconditional cash pilots, early intervention funding. Challenge stigma in conversations. Support local programs. And extend grace to others and, if relevant, to your own story. If this resonated, share the episode, reflect on one takeaway, and join the conversation. Humanity's progress depends on seeing each other clearly, brains, backgrounds, and all. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate.